Yep.
Good evening, councillors, staff and visitors, and welcome to our Agenda Forum meeting. Agenda Forums are specifically for items which are to be considered by the Council at the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda Forums are not decision-making forums. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters at the next ordinary meeting of Council for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the City's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in the meeting during public question time and deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to the Council and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Any leave of absence, Mr. CEO?
Mr. Mayor, I've got no leave of absence, but I do have a couple of apologies for tonight.
And they are?
Councillor Lucas, Councillor Scanlon, Councillor Richardson.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. CEO. Councillor Parry, are you with us? Councillors, visitors, as you're all aware, today is a Remembrance Day. Before we go into the meeting proper, I will ask you to please stand for a minute's silence to remember those that have fallen. Thank you.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them. Thank you, Evan. Declarations of financial and proximity of interest and interest affecting impartiality. Mr. CEO.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Congleton has expressed an impartiality in item C 1.2. That's the membership of Incorporated Association. He's declared an impartiality as he is a member of many associations. Councillor John McNamara has expressed an impartiality in the same item, and that he's a member of the Ballajura Soccer Club and also attends various other association meetings. Councillor Parry has declared a financial interest in item 8.1, that's the reconstruction of the materials recovery facility Cleanaway in South Guildford, as he has worked on the major contracts for his current employer for this principle. He too has also expressed an impartiality in item C 1.2, as he's a councillor as a membership of several incorporated associations. Councillor Kevin Bailey, the Mayor, has also expressed an impartiality in item C 1.2, as he is a member of several incorporated associations. Councillor Catalano has expressed the same impartiality in item C 1.2, and also in C 3.2 she's declared an impartiality. That's the acquisition of a portion of Lot 5, Sayer Street, Midland, and that she's a member of a community workshop that had dealt with the structure with the landowner. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other declarations from staff or councillors? Councillor Coley?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. C 1.2 and C 3.5, as I am a member of community organisations, and in regard to the statue, I may have made comment in relation to the statute through the Guildford Association.
Okay, Councillor Johnson, and you'll hand the paperwork in, I guess. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, same for me, Mr Mayor. C1.2, as I'm a member of numerous incorporated associations.
Okay. Councillor McCulloch. Same declaration. Councillor Henderson.
Can I ask the CEO, would these be matters that are general and more broadly across the community?
Mr CEO.
I'll ask Mr. Albert. No, not as far as I'm aware. This is quite specific because it's only incorporated associations. And the interest in common, the issue of the interest in common is not one which is now very hard to justify because you need to have, what sort of percentage is it, Mr. Albright? Quite a high percentage of people involved. So you can't use that one on this. Sorry.
Okay.
You can
Thank you.
fill out the form. Thank you.
Are there any others? Thank you. Public question time. Questions relating to reports and agenda. Questions 5.1, of which notice has been given. I have nil. 5.2, questions without notice. Any questions to the public on items on the agenda? None. Reports and motions of which previous notice has been given. Presentations and deputations. In Part A, there are nil. We go to Part B, and the first deputation is on item 4.2, proposed amendment number 88 to local planning scheme number 17 to rezone 8 properties along Adelaide Street, Hazelmere to a special use zone and light industrial as a result of the approved Metropolitan Regional Scheme Amendment number 1375-27. And Mr Aaron Lohman from Element WA, the applicant, speaking in support of the recommendation. Mr Lohman. You have 5 minutes, please, Mr Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here on behalf of my client, Mr Todd Burgess, who's representing the landowner of 190 Adelaide Street in Hazelmere. As alluded to, we're supportive of the officer's recommendation to initiate this scheme amendment. As councillors are aware, this has resulted from the lifting of the urban deferred zone in June this year, and the land is now zoned urban under the MRS. This is 9 years after the Hazelmere Enterprise Area Structure Plan was adopted, and some 8 years after the city requested an amendment to the MRS from the WAPC. The efflux of time, as Council has probably or is probably aware, relates to the resolution of traffic and transport issues, particularly the connection of Adelaide Street to Abernathy Road for Precinct 8, to which this land is contained. Given the time frames taken to get to this point, our client is very, very keen to progress a scheme amendment. In that regard, we have had discussions with the city's officers about the proposal, which are reported in the officers and the agenda report. In particular, our client requested that lots 189 and 190 be separated from the remainder of Precinct 8 of the Hazelmere Enterprise Area Structure Plan, which is essentially the land to the east of Stirling Crescent, bound by Adelaide Street to the south. We support the approach that officers have taken, which effectively proposes to zone our land light industrial with restricted use provision, and the remainder of Precinct 8 proceeds under a special use zone, as was foreshadowed some time ago. On behalf of our client, we did also request that lots 189 and 190 be subject to a separate amendment from the remainder of Precinct 8. And the purpose of this was to avoid potential delays associated between the potential differences within the land parcels. The land east and west of Stirling Crescent has different constraints. In particular, the land to the east has the direct frontage to residential south of Adelaide Street within the city of Kalamunda, and there's some environmental constraints associated with lot 20, which Council would be aware of. These characteristics may arise different concerns from statutory authorities when referrals occur. In particular, Council will be aware that there is a public environmental review required for the remediation of lot 20. Our preliminary discussions with DWER have indicated that this might have an effect on the referral of the scheme amendment to the EPA for their consideration prior to advertising. That is, as Council would be aware, all local scheme amendments have to be referred to the EPA for environmental assessment. Our concern is that, given the public environmental review required for Lot 20, this has the potential to hold up the scheme amendment in its entirety. It's not clear at this point in time whether that will occur or not. However, I've been instructed by my client, given the delays associated to get to this point, that Lot 189 and 190 be subject to a separate scheme amendment. The only change that we would ask Council to consider is an administrative one where the one amendment becomes two. The remaining provisions of the scheme amendment, as proposed by the officers, remain the same. We're aware that if the amendment does proceed as one, the potential solution, if there is difficulties at the EPA, is to separate the amendments out into two, but we'd prefer to avoid getting to that point in time and ask Council that they consider an administrative change to the officer's report to separate 189 and 190 into a separate amendment. Thank you.
Any questions to Mr Lohman? Councillor Catalano?
Thanks for that. Actually, I was quite just wondering whether you had any information about how that Lot 20 tip site was going to be cleaned up. What's going to happen with all of that? Got any ideas?
No, sorry, that's not my client's land.
That's not.
Yeah.
That, we're not at that stage yet. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is no public environmental review has been lodged as yet.
Oh, okay.
Has been undertaken,
All right.
I should say.
Okay, so
The city's officers could probably confirm that for you.
yeah, okay. So this is the sort of the most important aspect of this tonight. Then is the two lots on the other side of Stirling.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
gotcha. Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, given this looks like it's going to be quite a complicated alternate motion to put together, could we ask Mr Russell to comment on it right now about whether that's a feasible thing to do?
Mr Russell, is that a feasible thing to do? Yep, there you go.
Okay, and I guess because it sounds like it's quite complex, it might be a bit beyond the average councillor's ability. Would it be possible to get together with Mr Russell and come up with that alternate motion or that alternate approach for us? Okay. Thank you, Mr Russell. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr Lohman.
Thank you.
Our next deputation is on item 4.4 and 4.5, the proposed Brabham Local Development Plan number 1 and 2 for lot 9102 Walcott Avenue in Brabham. And the first speaker is to Paul Morgan from Peat Limited, speaking to support the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Morgan. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to present. My name's Paul Morgan. I'm from Peat Limited, and I'm accompanied by Jane Bennett, who's from CLE Town Planning. I'll present an initial background in respect to the project and the item before you, and Jane will expand on some more of the detail around the planning framework. I'd just like to note that we're aware this item was presented to you earlier on the September, and we're aware of the nature of the queries that came from councillors, and we've endeavoured to focus on that as much as we can. Just very quickly, current status of the project. It's 2,600 lots and will run over 15 years. It was launched earlier this year. Stage 1 and 2 are under construction. That's around 170 lots. And the two LDPs, or local development plans, before you are included in those lots. Stage 1 titles have been achieved, and we're expecting the balance of those 150-odd lots title in December and January. They're all the more traditional lots that we will have titled. Local Development Plan number 1 before you has not been presented to market yet for sale. Local Development Plan number 2, which represents the 8 lots and currently before you, has been presented to market, and 5 of those lots are under contract. Just quickly, Brabham Estate, obviously it's a partnership between Peat and Department of Communities. Underpinning the relationship with Department of Communities is a commitment to explore innovative and diverse housing solutions and outcomes which support both state planning policy and the Department of Communities' housing policies. Stage 1 and 2 via these LDPs are the first opportunity for us to demonstrate this, and Pete, and I can assure you, Pete and Communities are fully committed to a high standard for this product that will be reflected throughout the balance of the estate. The longer term focus of this type of product within the LDP is the delivery of the train station, the future Whiteman train station precinct, and obviously which is adjacent and interfaces with the Whiteman Neighbourhood Centre precinct. So obviously a bigger focus for this more innovative, smaller, more dense product will be focused on in the later stages of the development relative to the train station. There's just a few items I'd like to emphasise when considering the product proposed within the LDP. The 6 metre frontage designs are pretty established within the market and have been successfully delivered in the right context through the growth corridors of Perth, and you would always already be aware of that, and importantly has been fully accepted by the market. In regard to the proposed, what we'll call the Lightsview product that's included within the LDPs, I'd just like to emphasise that yes, they are small, they're the smaller frontages, but small does not mean cheap, and far from it. In fact, they are really innovative, architecturally designed houses for an important segment of the market, and Pete has been refining this product over a number of years in its Lightsview project in South Australia. The product is really quite strategic in a number of areas, around solar orientation, how it relates to a private open space. The design provides a real sense of height and scale. Whilst it's on a small lot, it's not the experience that you actually have when you actually walk through these homes. There's a lot of height in ceilings, there's a lot of scale and volume in the home, and most importantly, the designs have been progressed over time to ensure there's adequate light within all rooms within the home. There's demonstrated acceptance of this product in Adelaide, and there's the target market, and there's a variety of target market around singles, couples, investors and young families. It's notable that in terms of the Lightsview product, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it has been acknowledged through a number of reports that it's the best example of medium density housing on small lots within Australia. And this is not, we're not saying this is a document that was prepared by Urbis for the Development WA, previously Landcorp, and also the Department of Planning, and formed an important part of Department of Planning in forming its medium density policies that it's progressing at the moment, and Jane might want to actually comment on that. The clear drivers that form this, that drives this form of development are pretty clear. It's around affordability. The price points for this product is around 70% of the median price in the broader area relatively that it may sit. It needs the connectivity around this, so it's important that it's located adjacent to bus and train routes, services. Its location relative to amenity, and this is really important. The private open space is probably less than what normally would be expected in a traditional house and land.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. That's 5. And I'll just go a little bit over time. Questions of Mr. Morgan, councillors? Councillor Catalano, you were first.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about the Urbis. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
Well, that's a report that was prepared at the request of those agencies, being State Development WA.
And who prepared it? Sorry. Who prepared it?
Urbis.
And are they like a sort of independent company or something?
Yeah. Who would you explain? In terms a consultant. Yeah.
They're a consultant.
Who was appointed independent of Pete.
Oh yeah, and they're appointed by Pete.
No. They were appointed by Development WA, previously Landcorp, and the Department of Planning, Land and Heritage.
WA. Okay. And sorry, how did you spell that?
Urbis, URBIS.
Oh, yeah, good. All right. Thanks. I'll look it up. Thank you.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quick question. What have you changed from the September presentation that you gave to us from our concerns?
in terms of concerns. I think we're providing clarity around the concerns that were raised, and Jane is still to speak to some of that as well. The other piece to satisfy those concerns is probably around the delivery model. This is not a traditional delivery model where we sell lot by lot. These cells will be developed as cells that will importantly protect the whole streetscape. And I know the streetscape, tree locations, driveways, interface between the streetscape, the private landscaping and the home are really important. So that's what we wanted to emphasise, that they will be developed by Pete or another builder in cells as against individual homes.
Councillor Congerton.
Sorry, you mentioned the median house market rate will be 70%.
Around, as a rule, it's around 500, 450 odd. 450 odd.
Any further questions, Mr Morgan? Thank you, Mr Morgan. And the next speaker on the item is Ms Jane Bennett from CLE, also speaking in support of the recommendation.
Thank you,
Ms
Mayor.
Bennett.
Thank you for the opportunity to make the presentation. We appreciate you making the time, because you know that we did present back in September, and there were a number of questions that were raised by councillors at the 2nd of September, which hopefully I can touch on in the presentation. So we did circulate some material, which hopefully you've got access to, which is the PowerPoint presentation. So I'll just talk to perhaps some of the plans that are in there. As Paul said, we are in support of the officer recommendation. We're also in support of the modification that has been proposed. We're really keen to make sure that what we're providing here is of exceptional standard, because it is the first stages in the delivery of the medium density housing product. This will set the standard for the project area. And I think probably the most important takeaway for this is that it's an integrated build out. So these are small lots, but they're small lots that are being developed in street blocks at once, so you're not going to get single homes built one at a time by individual builders. There will be a build out of that streetscape, and that manages a lot of the construction challenges, the concerns in terms of by residents in terms of privacy and other things, because those homes are established at the beginning with those setbacks and things in place. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the approvals that are in place already. So the structure plan, which is included in the slide pack, has been approved, and that approved the residential R60 and R80 codings, which sets the density for these, and the Commission actually asked that we slightly increase the area of that when the structure plan was finally approved. So that R coding is approved. The subdivision plan that's contained within the pack, that is also approved. And so the subdivision plan was built form-led. So when we designed the subdivision, we knew the home designs that would be within those lots, and those lots have been sized appropriately so that you're getting the best outcome on each of those lots. You couldn't just come in and put any standard project home on any of those lots because they wouldn't fit. They need to be suited to the product that has been developed. The R-code plan similarly has been approved, and then there's a series of house plans home designs that are included here too. Some of the big points and some of the themes that were touched on in the questions here was around street trees. We've prepared a street tree master plan that's included in the pack. We'll be working with the city in terms of the delivery of that. Because it's an integrated build-out, those street trees will be protected during construction, and timing of the installation of those will be carefully managed. So street trees is front of mind and really, really important. Parking is also very, very important, and that had been raised previously. We are providing parking in accordance with the City of Swan's parking policy, and that's detailed in the officer report. We're providing additional on-street parking as per the city's requirements too. So there's nothing unusual there in terms of parking. It will be very carefully managed and provided as per the council requirements. Outdoor living areas and private open space on the lots. We're providing more private open space on these terrace lots at 20 square metre outdoor living areas than what's required under the R code. So the R codes require 16, we're providing 20. the interface to traditional lots, so it's a combination of single and two-storey homes where we're interfacing with a lot that's of a lower code. It will be a single storey so that you're getting a managed transition through there. And we're also very careful to manage that public open space interface too, in terms of surveillance and providing good frontages to the open space. So all of those lots will be rear load so that there's surveillance to the open space. I might be out of time, am I, Mayor?
No, you've got a minute or so to go.
Whoa. Some of the other themes that were in the comments that were raised were around the lightweight materials, and yet additional information has been provided around that. We're happy to speak to that, but we see it, as Paul mentioned, as quite an innovative product. We've provided a response in regards to parking. Yes, there's car parking, but there's also great pedestrian access through to the station and walkway links. We've actually got better connections here to public transport than what Lightsview had, given that was 8 k's from the CBD. We've got a train station in 1.7 k's, which we're very fortunate to have. And there were some questions around the design of air conditioning units and mechanical units. The great thing about the build-out is that will all be considered up front, so you're not getting conflicts there. And the alternate use of garages in similar situations, I hope people put their car in their garage. That's something that's typical in any community. We can't police how people use their garages, but there are requirements about parking restrictions on street and not over footpaths, so they should be able to be managed in the implementation, but we haven't had any issue previously in other projects.
And that's it, perfectly timed. Any questions?
Thank you.
Councillors of Mr Bennett? Councillor Parry and then Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question. Do you believe it's better having less POS is beneficial for community? That population is 0 to 9 years old, age 11.5%. Do you think it's beneficial to decrease the size of the POS in the area?
Decrease it from what's been approved already?
I believe there was less POS on what I heard from the last speaker was that there's less POS in the site. Am I right in saying that or not? Did I misinterpret it?
No. There's, the public open space has been provided as per the approved structure plan and as per the approved subdivision. So we're all square in terms of open space provision. We meet the requirements of the Commission, and that's all been signed off and approved. This first subdivision plan that's included in the pack identifies the open space. The street tree plan probably shows it better through there. So we're all square, and the outdoor living areas, which is what I just mentioned, the private courtyards are bigger than what's required under the R codes. Thanks, Councillor Parry.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. I remember in the 90s when the plans were done for this, there were a number of lovely villages and some lakes and things like that, and relatively low density. We've seen a progressive development to a point where it seems to me as though it's very significant development. So I think the issue then comes around, well, you talk about planting some trees, but I'm sort of wondering where they're all going to fit. And have you actually done the plan yet? Because if you have, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, sure. So the actual location of those trees relative to parking and servicing will be done as part of the engineering civil design with the city's officers. Craig and Paul might be able to comment a little bit further about where they're up to and interactions with the officers on that.
Thank you, everyone. So, yeah, look, we're early on in the phase, it's fair to say, in terms of the Street Tree Master Plan. I think we've lodged, or we've provided officers with an initial view of the plan in your pack. We have lodged engineering design across our stage 1 and 2, and I believe the street trees would have been allowed for within that plan. We are still working within the northern portion of structure plan number 2, which has just been lodged. We are working out the master plan and the street tree master plan for that, and happy to share that with you in due course.
Thank you. And are you concentrating on deciduous trees or?
It's a mixture of the variety of different. There's 6 different varieties of trees there.
They're principally deciduous, or all
I think there might be a couple of deciduous, but the majority are not, I believe.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr Bennett.
Thank you very much.
Councillors now move to item number 4.6, which is the Responsible Authority Report, proposed residential aged care and communal purpose development on Dale and Ukage Close, Middle Swan. The first speaker on that is Mr Peter Simpson, the applicant, speaking against the recommendation.
Mr Mayor, just while we're waiting, Councillor Jones has also expressed their impartiality in item C1.2, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Mr CEO. Thank you, Mr Simpson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I thought I heard my name when I was outside. Peter Simpson from PTS Town Planning, representing the owners of the subject site. Speaking on item 4.6. We don't support the recommendation before you to send to the JDAP, and we're asking you and seeking your support for the alternate recommendation. Here's what we know. We know that the provision of aged care facilities in the City of Swan is a major issue in the next 10 to 15 years. We know this because it's been identified in your strategies, in your documentation by the WAPC and by the state government. We know that there's a significant projected increase in people over 55 and, more importantly, over 70 in the City of Swan and in the Swan Valley. Therefore, we know that there is demand for aged care. This has been identified by the residents. Even the people that objected to this application identify the need. Most recently, it's been identified by the Minister. So it is clear there is a need. So what are the options? The options are consideration of the current application or something in Herne Hill. We know that Herne Hill has a number of problems associated with groundwater level, land availability, sewer connection, and many other issues. Additionally, the Herne Hill site doesn't resolve any of the issues raised by the officers in terms of noise, spray drift, and visibility. So what else do we know? We know that the site on which we're proposing to build the aged care has been vacant for as long as we can find records, which is going back to the 1950s. It has not been used for agricultural purposes. The fact is there's no groundwater available, it's a small land holding, and the soils are not highly productive. This would lead to indicate that the site is not appropriate for agriculture. The report actually confirms that the soils are not preferred for viticulture. So what else do we know? We know the adjoining site is Magic Million site, which has been recently developed, a lot of large sheds. We know to the north of that, which is the east of our site, is the proposed church, which we understand is being progressed to building permit if it hasn't already. And to the west is a single house, cleared land and vines. Therefore, the site is actually isolated without a productive use. So what else do we know? We have proposed a comprehensive mitigation approach to the issues raised in the report. We have demonstrated that we can mitigate the noise internally for the residents. We're concerned that the city or the report is identifying outdoor noise as an issue, which we find very concerning. If planning adopted this approach, we wouldn't have any dwellings near major roads, the airport, or train stations. We've also demonstrated that spray drift will not impact the facility or the surrounding properties, and we've done this through mitigation strategies. How do we know this will work? Because the SAT has actually considered this on the adjoining property, being the church. SAT concluded that with mitigation, appropriate mitigation in place, the impact on both the site and the vineyards is appropriately managed. So what else do we know? We know the proposed development, while 3 stories in part, represents as a 2-storey development. This is when viewed externally from the site. This is on the basis of the ground level of the 3-storey building has been cut a level into the site. This is evident in the sections and elevations. We know that this aged care facility has a similar footprint to Magic Million site next door. We know that proposed development will be less dominant than the Oakover buildings. We know that built form only occupies 10% of the site. That leaves 7 hectares of the site open landscaped areas. We know that the development proposes planting along the boundaries and internal to the site with species common to the area. We know, as we have undertaken a visual landscape assessment and prepared a model that a proposed development will not be viewed from key locations. We're slightly disappointed this has not been included in the report. Therefore, in turning back to the report before you and the reasons for refusal, the bulk and scale of development is not of urban appearance, given the built form which has been independently reviewed and supported, the lowering of the building height that occupies less than 10% of the total site area and is consistent in scale with adjoining buildings. The proposed use will not prejudice the future of the land. The land has never been used for agricultural production. With the proposed mitigation measures, the development does not prejudice the capacity of the surrounding uses.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. That's 5 minutes. Questions,
Mr.
Councillor?
Mayor,
Mr.
I'd
Simpson?
move a 2-minute extension to hear further.
I've only got one sentence left.
One sentence, then. You don't need 2 minutes then.
The only thing I wanted to end on is the capacity for Herne Hill to accommodate an aged care facility is currently available to landowners. How nothing's happened. Therefore, we don't agree with the recommendation and we seek your support for the alternate. Thank you.
Okay. Questions, councillors? None? Thank you, Mr Simpson.
Thank you.
The next speaker on this item is Mr Gordon Tucker, the owner, speaking against the recommendation of the proposal. Mr Tucker, thank you. You have 5 minutes also.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Gordon Tucker. I have been working on this site now for the last 9 years, and it all started with one of your councillors here, Charlie Zanino. Charlie Zanino introduced me to the thought of building an aged care facility in the Swan Valley. We looked at several sites around and all were rejected because of agricultural use. We were also, at that stage, we were pointed towards Dale Road and was told that the Roe Estate site would make a very good aged care facility. Now, that was 9 years ago. We were also told at the same time that the council had been looking for an aged care facility in the Swan Valley for 21 years. There's now 30 years since you've been looking for it. Nothing's been done in 30 years. We found the site, we worked on it, we bought the site, we bought 2 sites, we've spent money on the consultants, we've been here once before, we've been here in 2016. The chairman there, Kevin Bailey, you supported us on it last time when we were putting up for an additional use for the site, and we're going to put in aged care and the retirement village. This time we've come back with aged care because it's a use not listed, and we feel that it is absolutely needed in the valley. From our discussions we've had with many people in the valley, these are individual people, not committees, not groups or anything, individual people. They are very upset the fact that we have not started this thing, and they thought it was going to be started 3 years ago. We've done all the work, we've done everything, and as Peter has pointed out, we've looked at our site, we've compared our site to Herne Hill Village. Herne Hill Village is not the site. That site was also put up in 2015-16 by the Liberal government as the appropriate site. They said then that in 6 months they would resolve the sewage problem. Now, Mike Foley there will tell you about the sewage problems that they had because he told me about them, and that it is not an appropriate place to have an aged care facility. Now, we went and found a site that is a sandy site. We can put on a biomass system. We can do everything you want in that respect and also use that system to water the total site. The talk about spray drift is a furphy, and I understand by talking to many people out there who grow grapes there, 1 to 2 days a year that they spray. The truck noise is 2 or 3 days a year that it's done. We will put in double glazing on this particular development, and therefore that will mitigate the sound problems that we'll have from the outside. We talk about noise. Now, in the report put out by the council, the gentleman next door to us on the eastern side is worried about the noise that we may make on the site. So what noise has he heard from the harvesting of grapes? I don't think he's heard any at all. I think it's a furphy. I think it's been put up as another red rag to a bull, so everybody would jump on the bandwagon. I'm asking you people now to consider this and to consider it seriously, because a lot of time and effort has gone into it, and we feel that it is time something happened out there. Thank you. Any questions?
Tucker. Any questions of Mr Tucker, councillors? No? Thank you, Mr Tucker.
Thank you.
Takes us now to item 4.8, which is proposed outbuilding for a shed at lot 5505, number 29, Oldswater Chase, Averley. And the first deputation is from Mr Alan Jenner, the adjoining neighbour, speaking against the recommendation, and councillors, you would also received a written deputation from Mr Jenner. Thank you, Mr Jenner. You've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Mayor, councillors and Shire staff. I only found out, my wife and myself only found out about this proposal on Friday. So we haven't been advised by Mr Taylor, the owner of the property, and as such basically are requesting 21 days or thereabouts sufficient time to review all the documentation and draft a suitable submission that allows us to outline our concerns. So we've only had one working day, which was Monday, to have a look at all the plans and proposals. What I can say is, looking at the paperwork there, the preliminary findings on the documentation has not taken into consideration that the actual sketch provided was on a proposed building drawing, not the final drawing. So I don't know whether that was the actual building or the house, the dwelling, that was built on that land. That's my first thing. Secondly, my premises is a 600mm drop from that dwelling by 2 limestone blocks. You add that on top with the slab, the proposed slab, which is 200mm thereabouts, the wall height of 650mm, and what hasn't been listed here is the roof pitch of around about 1,000mm. That takes the proposed height of the structure to 3850. That's 3 metres, 850. Also, when I'm looking at the land width where the proposed structure is to be situated, in the spare garden there, is 4710, as per the proposed site plan. The width of the structure is 3520mm, as per his drawing. And the distance from his proposal is 350mm from the fence line, leaving 840mm from the house wall, his house wall, to the side of the proposed structure, minus the width of the eaves. Is this 840mm sufficient? And given the proposed width, length and height dimensions has been calculated, and does that allow for enough light to be transmitted into his residence, bearing in mind that you're reducing a lot of sunlight? Further, given the R Code section 3, 5 and 7.3 requirements, I am unable to see how the proposed structure is deemed to comply. I am unsure if the full impact of the residential amenity has been fully covered, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't. The owner has advised that the shed is intended to be used for the storage of a vehicle. Can the owner fully disclose the proposed structure use, as this size is more akin to a workshop? I have a diagram here of a Dodge Ram, being one of the biggest vehicles you can get in WA, and that's 6 metres long. Given this is a 9 metre long workshop, 3 metres is going to be used for tools, working, compressor and the like. It's not just a shed. Finally, I'd just like to draw your attention to the EPA definition of amenity. Amenity is a broad term that generally means the qualities, attributes and characteristics of a place that make a positive contribution to the quality of life. For the purpose of the EIA, amenity values include both visual amenity and the ability for people to live and recreate within their surroundings without any unreasonable interference with their health, welfare, convenience and comfort. Noise, odour and dust all have the potential to unreasonably interfere with the health, welfare, convenience and comfort of people. What I'm asking for is a bit more time so I can go through more of this to come up with an argument as to why I don't think it's suitable.
Thank you, Mr Jenner. Spot on time. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Catalano?
Yeah, thank you. Which side of this lot are you resident on?
To the south side.
So
if you look on the right-hand house with the light, yeah. So the picture there, I'm on the right hand.
You're still on Ullswater Chase, are you?
No.
You're on the next street.
Mine is the next street, yeah.
Yeah,
So
on the corner,
on
the next one.
On the right one.
You're there.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So that drops down 600 from
that block there.
that block there.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that. That's great.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr Jenner.
Thank you.
Our next speaker on this item is Mr Liam McLaughlin, also an adjoining neighbour, speaking against recommendation. Thank you, Mr McLaughlin. You've got 5 minutes.
All right, well, thank you for giving me the time to speak. I'll try and be as thorough as possible. So pretty much all my arguments are kind of in accordance with the WA State Planning R codes. So clause 5.4.3 states that all outbuildings must satisfy the following. So do not exceed a wall height of 2.4, which the proposed wall height is 2.65, and are set back in accordance with tables 2A and 2B. Now, I believe these two sections of that clause kind of go hand in hand the most, because you've got wall height and then you've got the setback. So Mr Taylor's proposed shed is located 0.35 metres off our shed fence. Now, table 2.A and 2.B states that an outbuilding with or without major openings with a wall length greater than 9 metres and up to 10 metres and a wall height less of 3.5 shall be set back 1.5 metres from the boundary. So that's well within that 1.5 metres. Now, in the proposal he has stated that it only has to be set back 1 metre, but that would be for a 9 metre shed. Now, this is between 9 to 10 metres long. So that means it has to be set back 1.5 metres. As well, it's also got a major opening as it's got a massive roller door on the front. So that would, even if it was a 9 metre shed, it would still have to be in that 1.5 metres. So, so what he has stated, I believe to be incorrect with the R codes mentioned above. Also doesn't take into account, as Mr Jenner said, that our blocks are stepped down from his blocks. So my block is stepped down 400 mil from his. So that makes that overall wall height 3.05 metres. Now, so you've got to take into the R code states, so 4.2.1, this is in the explanatory guidelines, says that you must consideration of setbacks should have regard to the natural ground level of adjoining properties. So they've not taken into the natural ground level of our two properties. Now, what else? So the proposed shed, it pretty much runs the length of our fresco and backyard. So it's kind of, he has stated that, where are we? That it will be 11% of the sunlight will not reach our backyard. Now that 11% of my property, which will not get any winter sun, takes into my whole garden, which I've planted. So, and pretty much all my garden requires at least 8 hours of sunlight. That can't be achievable. That 11% of my property also takes into my theatre room, which is also a potential 4th bedroom. So that takes in all the sunlight out of that. So in the proposal, it states that Mr Taylor has advised that the shed is to be used for the storage of a vehicle. Now, the City of Swan website states that the shed is an enclosed, non-habitable outbuilding that is detached from any dwellings but is not a garage. It also states that a garage is to be a roof-enclosed, non-habitable structure attached to a dwelling to accommodate a vehicle. So we were approached by Mr Taylor in June of this year, so we were given the proposed plans, which we were told to act on within at least a few working days, so he could send that back to and then get this process put forth. When we were approached, we were informed that he would be using the shed to store materials for his work and to be used as more of a hobby shed. So not a garage or that was put forth in the proposal. So pretty much he was saying that he's wants a hobby shed that he was going to use to work on vehicles, blah, 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 and also to store his work. Now, he's an electrician, and I'm an electrician as well, so I know what he's going to be storing in there. So a shed is not to be used to store vehicles, so we can only assume that Mr Taylor will be using the proposed shed for work purposes and the use of power tools with the high likelihood to cause a nuisance. The English Dictionary defines a workshop as a room, area or small establishment where manual or light industrial work is done. So we believe Mr Taylor's proposed shed to be more than likely to be used as a workshop, not what has been put forth in the proposal and not what we have had in previous discussions. And also during our discussions in June, the proposed shed location that we were told is not what has been put forth in the plan. He has a gate at the front of his property, which he told the shed would be set back a metre from that gate, so he could put his council bins and whatnot. This means that it would encroach probably 2.5 metres or more onto our neighbour's property. So again, what he's put forth is not what has been discussed privately and not what he has put forth to me in the June of this year.
Thank you, Mr McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Councillors, any questions of Mr McLaughlin? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Mr McLaughlin, just so I can be really clear about this. So you're at number 43 Ullswater Chase, is that right?
43 Lady Bow Vista.
43 Lady Bow Vista. All right, okay. So that's that house on the corner that we see there. Yeah. And I guess the question arises, has to be asked, what's the setback of your house from the boundary of the house where the shed is?
I believe, so from the fence to the theatre room?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe it's 1.7 metres.
Okay.
And then 4 metres to the start of the back wall of that alfresco. So we've got 4 metres from there to the fence line.
Okay, thank you very much. And my understanding is that your home is 400 metres lower down.
400 mil, yes.
Yeah. So that's quite a big difference in levels.
Yeah. So that makes the wall height over 3 metres. So again, that wasn't put forth in his proposal, as were quite a few things.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Councillor Scully.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm interested to know whether you'd also like another 21 days or a month to consider the implications of it.
Yes. Because I think what has been put forth is not what has been discussed and is not what is to be true. So I think Mr Taylor also needs time to put forth something. So then, because also I'd encourage, if any council member or anyone wants to come out and view from my property, because it's kind of hard to describe how it's going to affect our alfresco without seeing it in person. So I encourage anyone who wishes to come out to view this, to get in contact, and we can go from there.
A question to staff, Mayor.
Well, we are having Q&A at the end, so you can ask as many questions of Mr Russell on this one as you like, Councillor. So, any further questions of Mr McLaughlin? Thank you, Mr McLaughlin.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now go to item 4.10, the proposed home business at Lot 5, number 171, George Street, West Swan. And our first speaker will be Mr John Rex from the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance, speaking against the recommendation. And councillors, you would have had written deputations from Mr John and Marie O'Neill. Thank you, Mr Rex. You know the drill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Can I say that the Swan Valley Tourist Alliance does not support the officer's recommendation on this particular item. We do, however, fully support the Swan Valley Planning Committee's decision to refuse the application.
from a tourist point of view, you've got to look at George Street. George Street is probably one of the prettiest streets in the valley. It takes in Windara honey, Settlers Rest farm stay, vineyards, wineries, historic house of St Leonard's, and it's just a beautiful drive through there. What we see about this application, it is not a home business. It really should be in somewhere in Malaga industrial area or in perhaps Midvale. The business is known as Industrial Surpluses Australia, and if you go on the website you will see the volumes of different equipment that's available for sale. Most of it, or 99% of it, has got nothing to do with agriculture, viticulture or the Swan Valley. So we see that as not being an appropriate home business. That's all I've got to say at this stage. Any questions?
Mr. Rex, any questions of Mr. Rex, councillors?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rex. The next speaker on this item is Mr. Miro Landich, the adjoining neighbour, speaking against the recommendation. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Landich.
Good evening. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Now, there's a lot of points to consider in this. The reason, how does the business fit in the 50 square metres? How does the business expect to fit in all the equipment on sale? Because there's over 1,800 items that are listed on the website. Where does the large equipment go once the approval is granted for the 50 square metre home business? Tractors, etc. Won't fit in pallet racking. Conditioning for the approval is well and good, but how do you monitor compliance is the question. The sheds where the home business will be going are larger than 50 square metres. So who checks that they are just his personal items that, as he states, in the rest of the shed, not sale items? He states he has a location in Malaga where, why not move the entire business there? It's more suitable. If a large item is listed and somebody complains to the city, how will that be monitored? If a compliance officer follows up, he'll say it's located off-site or somewhere else, not at home. So no action can be taken. Mr. Pavlinovich has a bad record on compliance, so all he wants to do is legitimise a business which has been operating without approval for many years. If it's that easy to just sell off the larger items, as the proposal states, off-site to meet the home business definition, why have all these large items been for sale for a number of years? Where will they be removed and why now, if it's so easy to sell off all those items that won't fit in the 50 square metres? He states that the items may be stored for years before being sold. He has been granted approval for his personal truck, which is more than 3.5 tonne, and it's been witnessed on several occasions with items being brought to and from the site on it. Plus other large commercial vehicles have brought items to and from the site on many occasions, including large cherry pickers which needed to be transported by low loader. The items stored in the paddocks are in fact subject of the application, and as they stated that they're not, as the industrial business operating from the site has these items for sale, and the spread and all those items are spread over 2 properties. Customers do come in on the site, as I've had people who come to my premises looking for his site as far as retail trade. In summary, Mr. Pavlinovich can take me to the Supreme Court and try and stop me from spraying, because I have a table grape vineyard that's next door, yet I'm not allowed to complain about 2 properties covered in industrial sale items which don't comply with any of the zonings as far as the Swan Valley is concerned. The council has made the comments that there were only 3 objections to the proposal. The only person notified of the application was Eddie Stanley. I found out from Eddie. It's not for me to canvass people in the area, but I was surprised, and I did say to the Shire that I was surprised the council never sent letters out to people in close proximity for comment. Otherwise you would probably have a lot more complaints to this going through. So I hope you see the proposal for what it really is and uphold the decision made by the SVPC. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Lennick. Any questions? Councillor Coley?
Just in relation to the applicant's property, where do you reside? Which
I reside adjoining to the second property he owns, which is not the one that he is applying for the thing, but all the stuff is stored on that property, which is the property that he resides on.
So are you on West Swan Road or?
No, I'm on George Street.
George Street, 7690.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Question. This might be better asked of the owner, but can you tell us why you mentioned two properties? Because there's only one. Which this is.
The business is located on one of the properties, and that's where the application's for. But he lives on the adjoining, so there's two blocks there, and so both blocks, the stuff that he's selling is spread over both lots. So you have to include the lot where he's living, not just where he's applying for the 50 square metre shed.
Yeah.
Because all the stuff is spread over both properties.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Podolnik.
Can I confirm, did you have the opportunity to respond to this development application? Were you one of the neighbours who...
I did. So there is a response there from me. I think that everyone should have my response. I did make a full response. This is probably just a summary of some of the points as to where it doesn't meet, I suppose, all the zoning requirements and the amenities of the area that it's going in.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Landich. Next speaker is Mr. Eddie Stanley, speaking against the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Stanley. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to discuss the running of Industry Surplus Australia on my neighbour's property. I've witnessed the running of this business for many years and have hundreds of photos. It involves mostly buying goods from auctions, and any item at the auction is fair game. Industry Surplus Australia sells cars, boats, jet skis, cherry pickers, lawn mowers, forklifts, tractors. The list is never ending. My objection to this business reached breaking point on the 28th of July 2016, as it was ruining the enjoyment of my property to a point that I could no longer tolerate. Since my first complaint, things only got worse, and it seemed the entire business was shifted to my boundary. All of my complaints to the City of Swan were mostly ignored, and I kept receiving letters from the City of Swan that were absolute nonsense. Before throwing money and legal action at the city, I tried the State Ombudsman, and hopefully you guys have read their report, etc. Preparation for sale. This is a point. This is what started the action by me in the first place, and has not been addressed at all in the application, which requires 50 square metres. The fault finding, testing and preparation of items to sell them is done in the paddock directly opposite my outdoor entertaining area. Items bought are usually mechanically unsound, which calls for mechanics, auto-electricians and hydraulic experts to work on them. This creates more visitors to the property, dust, engine noise and fumes, etc. There is also a compressor and a large diesel refuelling station just 5 metres off the boundary, once again in front of my entertaining area. Hoarding. The business model promotes hoarding on a large scale. Not all the items bought at auction to be on-sold can be sold. And then because the applicant has paid for these items, it's harder to let go of them and acknowledge that it was a bad purchase. These items then get left on the boundaries, and when questioned by authorities in the future, no doubt he will say they are personal, i.e. the place looks like a junkyard. Office space. The application doesn't list some of the items that need clarifying. Office space has not been mentioned or included in the 50 square metres. There are currently 3 transportable offices on the property. Are these offices going to be used for the business? There has only been one office shown on the applicant's plan, I've sent out photos of the other two that are just 2.5 metres off my property. Truck. The applicant has indicated he will retain a truck on the property for personal use, but has not specified the type or weight of the truck. I suspect it will be a 7-tonne high truck that he currently uses for the business. Photos of this truck were supplied with my deputation email. Payment and collection of goods. Application posted to me on the 16th of the 7th this year states goods sold are generally picked up and delivered by freight. The use of the word generally leaves all other options open, i.e. people coming to the property and paying cash for the items, which is preferred way of paying for the goods, as per what it states on his websites. Notification. As far as I know, I was the only resident in the area contacted by the city in regard to this application. Should more people have been notified, I believe there would be more opposition to this application. Thank you for listening to my concerns. Do you have any questions?
Any questions, Councillor Coley?
Eddie, just can you confirm which lot you are? You're 7300 by the sounds of it? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Plovnik.
Sorry, I've got a question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Russell. Should I do that later?
Yeah, can hang on then. Mr Russell will speak to this one. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Congleton.
In your opinion, how much of the subject lot is being used for storage of goods to be sold?
There'd be at least 200 metres of boundary line that has items, and over the years it increases, expanding, etc. So there's more than 200 metres. But it's the activities, like I've said it's the activities that go on in the paddocks, getting the goods ready for sale, the noise and that carry on. He starts up jet engines, blows loud horns, drives this forklift all over the two properties, which beeps when it reverses, and it even drives around in reverse. It drives you nuts because it goes 7 days a week from dusk till dawn.
Further questions? Thank you, Mr Stanley.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Mr Neven Pavlinovich. The applicant speaker will support the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Pavlinovich, and you two have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mayor, Ms Councillors, Executive. I'd like to not go off on the emotional tangents here and just keep it to the point. My wife and I have been running our business for some 19 years. We were not aware that it didn't meet the requirements. It's a small online business, has no employees, it's just my wife and myself. We specialise in very unusual things. I bought something in here. This is typical of what I sell. It's a PLC. It's like a computer logic board. It's used to run a food factory. Runs a conveyor or something like that. That's what I basically do. Almost, I would say 90% of everything we sell is shipped in a 1 kilo or 3 kilo satchel. So that gives you an indication of what's really going on here. We were unaware that the business was in contravention of the requirements. To that end, we had Stephen Tan come out onto the property for about an hour. He was accompanied by Councillor Rod Henderson, and he saw no issues with the way we operated. In fact, he actually wrote 2 letters to Mr Stanley saying that he saw no issue with the way that the business was being conducted. Since becoming aware of the fact that it doesn't comply, we've been rectifying the issue. To that end, we are in the SATs, and I have since December sent something like 1,500 items, very small stuff I've just had tucked away. It's a farm. I mean, I've been collecting stuff for 20, 30 years like we all have. But I've been doing the right thing. I've been sending it away, and I've been keeping the council up to date with the process. They've been up every probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks. The council gets an updated list of all the items that have been removed from the property. We can go down to 50 square metres. This is not an issue. This is what we do. It's 50 square metres of shelf space. That's what we're asking for. I was born in the Valley. I'm on the third land grant in the state. I believe I reside in the oldest building in the state, the Workers' Cottage of Springvale. That dates back to 1829. I think I've got the most beautiful property in the Swan Valley. And I'd like to stop here and personally ask every one of you, come and have a look yourself. Come down George Street. You can't see anything from George Street. Come down, please, and have a look. That's the only fair way to make a decision on this, right? To get an honest answer, because I sincerely believe that if this process was put under oath, all of these, everything you've heard tonight would have evaporated. We're asking for 50 square metres. We have 2 properties that encompass 40,000 square metres. We're asking for 50 square metres on the home we live on and on the property that we live on. That does not, I run a property like the other people here. I've got 2 tractors. I've got a boom lift because I've got 300 trees. I have a truck. The truck was approved in 2012. The exact same truck, that exact same truck that's used for deliveries, I bought 11 years ago, and it's done 14,500 kilometres in 11 years. Right? So that's 1,300 kilometres a year. Please, that is the reality of this situation. We're not open to the public. The gates are normally locked, just like Mr. Lendich's and Mr. Stanley's gates are always locked. So people just can't walk in off the street. That's not possible. 48% of our sales are international. As I said, just like that. Goes in a DHL bag. DHL comes 3 days a week. Anything larger goes down to the freight forwarders in Malaga on Tuesdays and Fridays. And I take it in my car. It's very important to understand here, I have 6 adjoining neighbours to our property. My wife and I own the vacant land to the north, so there's 5 neighbours. We have, and I've provided you with 4 letters from the 4 other neighbours saying they've got no issue, they've never had an issue, despite one of the deputations from Mr. Stanley stating that all the neighbours have had issues. One of our neighbours, Mr. Tommy, said, I didn't even know I ran a business there. So there's only one neighbour that's complained about this, and this is an ongoing problem which you'd be very aware of that it's been going on for 6 years. And but I'd prefer not to go there on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Pavlinic. That's your time.
I move an extension of time, please, to hear more further.
How much more time do you need? Because I've already given you an extra 30 seconds.
1 minute, and I've just about finished this thing.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Righto.
Thank you. On George Street, which is our street, you cannot see anything from George Street. It's not possible. I've provided you a bunch of photos there from George Street that were taken on Friday. I think they were taken Friday morning. You can see that nothing can be seen. As for, you cannot see anything from West Swan Road onto the Lot 5 property. It doesn't exist. We did have, up until recently, the neighbour to the north just cut down 31 trees, 20-metre trees. So where you could not see anything on the vacant lot, now you can see something, but that's just a vacant lot. On that particular vacant lot, I've got concrete blocks because we're doing retaining walls. I've got poles. I've got some electrical wire because we've had a shed approved for that lot. It's basically building materials. That, I think, is where I'd like to stop. Just to say that we've got a week before it's voted, and I encourage, if any of you got spare time, please just come out and have a look and make yourself, see for yourself and judge for yourself.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Pavlinic? Councillor Catalano.
Yes, thanks. So it's just this 50 square metres,
yes.
yeah. So what about all this other stuff that you've got on the property?
That's all been removed. Which other photos we're talking about? Sorry, ma'am.
Well, there's seems to be quite a lot of stuff on there. Like, for instance, the
I had two
demountables. Are they staying on the boundary line? The demountables. There's a couple of transportable.
Every building on Lot 5 on 171 George Street is approved by the council.
Oh, so those demountables have been approved,
Absolutely,
have
they have been.
Okay.
2016. One's used as a. I have a flying background. Everyone flies in my family, and that's actually got all model aeroplanes in it. And I'll just let you know that I do have a plane in the paddock. It doesn't have any wings. It's a fuselage cut into 3.
Plane. And that's going to stay there, is it, in the paddock?
Yeah, it's not for sale. My boys fly. They're 12 and they're 13 and 15. Yeah. And I used it to teach them how planes are put together.
Okay. And how many demountables have you got on the fence?
None.
That you've got approved?
Oh,
Sorry, the
two.
Transportables?
2. There's a 20-foot and
Two
a
have
20-foot.
been
There's 2 by 20 feet. They've got personal items in them. There's no business items in those.
Okay. And so everything is going to be removed from the property except
Correct.
for some small things that you're going to keep in the shed.
And any personal stuff like my 2 tractors, my boom lift, tools that I use on the property. I'm keeping 2 large toolboxes. Remember, I still run a property. I've still got. If you come and see, if you came, you'd see what I'm talking about.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Any further questions, Councillor Johnson?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, a question for you, Mr. Pavlinovich. So, do you actually live at 171 George Street?
Yes, sir. I've lived there since 1973.
Okay, thanks. So, when one of the objectors mentioned the second property, how is that involved?
He was incorrect, sir. I don't live on the second property. I live on that's a vacant bit of land.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, if this were to be approved, on what date would you remove all the extra?
I would expect to be finished within about. I've got to be honest with you. I've been doing it for 12 months. It was a lot bigger job than I thought. I would expect about 4 months. I think I'd be finished. The reason is, I've been sending everything down to Ross's auctions. I'm not selling it. I'm just clearing it out. But there is a limit. Ross's is absolutely chock-a-block at the moment because Gregson's have gone and Beavis have gone. They've all been bought out. So and there's a limit to what you can send, that they'll only take so much.
I guess the next question is, would there be a list of things that you're going to leave behind that are going to stay there that you regard as personal property and which are not for sale?
I've provided that list to our council. That's already provided it to your council, sir, in the State Arbitration Tribunal.
Any other questions of Mr. Pavlinovich? Thank you, Mr. Pavlinovich.
Thank you.
Councillors, that takes care of all of the deputations, so we're now going to questions and presentations to staff. And Mr. Vanderlyn and Mr. Russell are first cabs off the rank. So, Mr. Russell, there's a number of items there that fit under your management structure, for want of a better word, that you may wish to comment on for councillors' benefit. I'm sure you've picked up on some stuff there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'll probably go through very quickly, and it might be best suited just to, as I normally do, field whatever particular questions that councillors might have on individual items. I think we've already remarked on item 4.2, which was the deputation by Mr. Lohman on the Hazelmere Amendment, and as I advised Mr. Mayor, it's quite easy and feasible to facilitate what Mr. Lohman suggested or requested, which was to split the amendment for the 2 properties as 2 separate amendments to the same end rather than a single amendment, and I'll carry through with that at Councillor Johnson's request for an alternate motion.
Mr. Mayor, could we ask questions as we go through each item, because then they're relevant to what Mr. Russell's been talking about?
Well, I've just asked Mr. Russell to present on the items that are deputations, and you can open him up for questions as much as you want.
Okay, if I can ask you a question now, Will. Mr. Russell, could you explain for the benefit of those councillors who don't know about Lot 20 Adelaide Street what it is?
It's a storied lot in the history of the city of Swan, as many of staff that have been here for some time will know quite clearly. It used to be owned by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Pollock, who ran Soils and Soils. And Mr. Pollock, for a number of years, facilitated it as a licensed, with in effect, tip site. There is a multitude of various materials that have been deposited on that land over the last 33 odd years, ranging from some industrial waste of various sorts, hydrocarbon materials, industrial sludge and others, organic wastes, contaminated soils, car bodies, as well as what it was licensed for originally, inert waste, inert building waste. So the site has been recognised. It's on our register in the EPA's register as a contaminated site. As Mr. Lohman has intimated, the proponents of the land that purchased it, eventually Hazelland Proprietary Limited, the current owners, made a development application to the Metro West JDAP in about 2013 to rehabilitate it. It went through a very exhaustive process of being reviewed in terms of the environmental documentation, in terms of the proposed rehabilitation and management. Mr. Lohman is quite correct, I think, in the end, that it was subject, at the end of a public environmental review process. A planning approval has been issued by the JDAP with conditions, and it's the sort of process where not only will they need the planning approval, more importantly, they will need the environmental approval. I know they have the planning approval. I'm not precisely aware of where they're at with the environmental approval. Suffice to say is that the EPA will closely regulate any rehabilitation of that site. It hasn't occurred. It's stabilised. I was looking at an aerial of it today. It's obviously got some grass cover over the soil, and at the moment nothing's happening with it. So that's the state of play with that.
Councillor Kiley.
Mr. Russell, in any rehabilitation plan, can it be determined where they're going to take the material that they might excavate out of the site? Because it concerns me the toxicity of the material that exists on the current site. I'm concerned where they're going to put it, and whether that be at Red Hill or anywhere else. Can that be determined in a some sort of clean-up plan?
Through Mr. Mayor, well, look, if it's going to be governed by a public environmental review, then the EPA is going to govern where the waste can be disposed of, and it's obviously only going to be able to be disposed of a facility that's appropriately licensed for such a disposal. So that process, I'm sure, will take care of itself in terms of the agencies that govern it.
Councillor Johnson.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, another question on the disposal and rehabilitation of the land. I seem to recall, would have been 3 years ago, we had a presentation from Mr. Moltoni about how he was going to reprocess the waste and remove the toxic materials. Can you explain what's happened to that proposal?
I can't. I'll venture an opinion. Mr. Moltoni's business model for rehabilitating and facilitating the commercial filling of land, I don't think would have covered off the special case that is Lot 20 Adelaide Street. So Mr. Moltoni was engaged by Hazelland to facilitate that, but I'm not certain that Mr. Moltoni is still involved in the proposal.
Thanks. Just to follow up, would there be any disadvantage to this proposal of splitting the scheme amendment into two that you could see?
To be fair, I think Mr. Lohman is quite prescient in his concerns that if it goes, as this amendment, if it goes to the EPA as it must, and the EPA's got to give clearance before the amendment can proceed. If the EPA has concerns with land that is subject to the amendment, namely Lot 20, they may well tie it up with certain requirements or issues to be addressed before they allow the amendment to proceed. So splitting the amendment to allow Mr. Lohman's client's land on one side of Adelaide Street to proceed independent of the balance of the land, which will include Lot 20, will hopefully separate out the issues if they are issues for the EPA. Yep.
I guess the next question is, I'm kind of assuming that all this land is owned by the same organisation, so splitting the scheme amendment into two would enable one part to be rezoned, and that presumably will generate some cash to perhaps enable the rehabilitation of Lot 20. Is that a reasonable proposition?
No, there's more than simply two owners. There's a raft of different lots and land ownerships in the report. I don't believe, this is my own opinion, I don't believe that the rezoning of Lot 20 to special use is going to enhance the possibility, the economics of the rehabilitation of Lot 20. It is what it is, whether it's zoned under this amendment or stays as it is in general rule.
Councillor Catalano.
Do you think that there's a chance that this tip site's never going to be rehabilitated?
If I was a betting man,
Yeah.
History would show it's been like this in this form
Yeah.
for 33 odd years. There is some suggestions that some parties have suggested that in order to do this, given the potential state of contamination, you might need to have some enclosed air dome. So if there's any truth to any of that, and if we look at the costs of it, and if the costs of the rehabilitation exceed what would be the market value of a modest return on light industrial land, it may never happen. That's right.
Okay.
It's conceivable.
And the other thing is then, so I'm just, if you could just please explain, then this new zoning to urban. I mean, I don't see what. I mean, is it just some sort of administrative thing? Given that more than likely this land is not going to, nothing's going to happen with this except it just stays a tip forever.
Yes.
Or
yes.
Certainly as long as I'm around.
Yeah. Look, it's important to note it's urban under the Metropolitan Region scheme, but it is not going to urban under our local planning scheme. It sounds a little bit incongruous, but it is possible to have an urban zoning under the Metropolitan Region scheme and automatically we connotate residential. Not so. You may still have a light industrial zoning under a local planning scheme consistent with an urban zoning. And the reason being is the light industrial effectively is an industrial use that has virtually no emissions. So for all practical purposes, it has the same level of impacts largely as urban, so it can sit within an urban Metropolitan Region scheme zoning. So it will be light industrial, but certainly, as I said, it won't. That process will sit independent of any requirement for the rehabilitation of the land. If they want to develop it, look, I mean, I think it would be fair to say that it would be virtually, it may well be economically impossible to rehabilitate it to the level to get residential on it. Light industrial or something else, maybe less so, but it's still going to come at a cost. So I don't see that the zoning change in any way has any practical reflection on whether or not the land will be rehabilitated by the proponent.
Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Russell, the residents who live south of these subject lots, I know that this is of great concern to them, and they live in the city of Kalamunda. I'm interested in the extent to which the City of Swan has an obligation to consult with the residences outside City of Swan boundary, and to the extent to that, has that been done at all, or what has the City of Kalamunda been made aware? Is this application also going before the City of Kalamunda, for example?
Just through you, Mr Mayor, in relation to this rezoning application, if it's initiated, yes, it can be referred part of the public consultation, can go to the Shire of Kalamunda residents on the other side. What I can say is, yes, to some extent there has been over the years concerns with the Shire of Kalamunda with its residents, but I can say for the most part, most of the concern from the Shire of Kalamunda has been with not this site, but the operation next door at the corner there, which was being used for sand excavation. In all practical realities, as a cover for a landfill operation that Mr. Gangemi's company ran. And look, we worked very hard to get Mr. Gangemi to move his operations from that site to another site in Talbot Road in Hazelmere, properly zoned for the purpose and a specially built facility. And Mr. Mayor, Council might recall contemplating and considering that very amendment to achieve that end. And city staff work very closely with both Department of Water and Environment Regulation staff and Shire of Kalamunda staff and Shire of Kalamunda councillors in various forums and meetings to facilitate an address to the concern of those residents. And I'm pleased to say it's one of the classic situations where we've been able to achieve a welcome and highly effective outcome, even for residents of another shire in that street.
So I'm a little bit lost there. Excuse me, Mr. Russell. So we haven't consulted with the residences to the south of the subject properties. Is that correct?
On this rezoning proposal, no, because it's got to be initiated. So if we initiate, if the council chooses to initiate this amendment, and in fact, going back to answer a question, Mr. Mayor, that Councillor Catalano posed and I didn't cover off on, yes, we're required to rezone our scheme here. We must advance this amendment because it needs to bring our local scheme into legal compliance with the Metropolitan Region scheme, and the law says within 60-odd days, 90-odd days of the zoning change. So we have to do this, and if we do it, then it's passed for advertising. Absolutely, the advertising can include those residents along Adelaide Street and direct referral to the Shire of Kalamunda. The answer to that is yes, most certainly that will happen.
So what concerns me is once we initiate it, aren't we getting ahead of ourselves before we consult with the residences in the area? That's my concern. This is
no, Mr. Mayor, absolutely not, because the law says we must do it. It's not a choice. We must do it, otherwise we're in breach. We must bring it into compliance. You might say, well, if we must do it, then it doesn't really matter what the advertising proposes, but that's the way that the planning framework and the planning legislation has been set up.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, I might just seek your advice or the CEO's advice. Before I became a councillor, was involved in a public protest against the lot that Mr. Russell referred to in the recycling, Mr.
Gangemi's property at the end of...
I was involved in a public process there. Do I have to submit a disclosure form on that?
Discretion's always a better part of valour, Councillor, so
Thank
it might
you.
not be a bad idea. Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Ms Russell, in regard to disposal of contaminated material, clearly there are sites where that stuff can go. And do EPA set up a plan around that, or are we part of that process?
Through Mr. Mayor, look, I'm not really well placed to answer the mechanics of what happens with the disposal of waste through a process, but the approvals issued at that level through the EPA usually, at least in my experience, are often issued in the name of the relevant minister. And the process there is that the proponent really directly complying and certifying compliance with the relevant government department. We may be involved incidentally if something requires our input, but as far as a regulatory sense is the proponent complying with the ministerial agency decision, and we don't have any direct involvement with that.
So where I was heading with that is the certification of the amount of material that's collected from a place and the amount of material that's deposited in another one, because often only a small portion gets deposited in another one, and how that's certified. So I guess that's EPA's problem.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Well, you can go on the end of the list. Councillor Johnson's next.
Oh, sorry.
Go next. Yeah, Mr. Russell, just a question just on process. So if we initiate the scheme amendment, that triggers the consultation?
Yeah, if we initiate the scheme amendment, the ordinary process is we get the EPA's consent to advertise it, if advertising is required. and then it goes out for advertising use.
That alternate motion, can we also include, as Councillor Carley has pointed out, the need to consult with the residents of Kalamunda, who I know are extremely interested in this?
Through Mr Mayor, I see no reason why Council can't, as part of the ordinary advertising process, specify the type of advertising or a particular direction of advertising.
And to notify the City of Kalamunda, that could be in there as well. And I got another question as well about, does the special use zone, which is how we're going to rezone a lot of this, does that give a sufficient buffer zone to those are brand new houses, councillors, they're only about 10 years old. Does it give a sufficient buffer zone to protect them from potential industrial users?
Through Mr Mayor, if my former colleague Mr Tan was here, he could tell you chapter and verse of the situation where when this land was being contemplated with the Hazelmere Enterprise Area Structure Plan, and we were contemplating industrial activity, it was referred to the Shire of Kalamunda, and the proposal for land north to be industrial preceded, I believe, the residential development on the southern side of Adelaide. And for what it was worth, I believe Mr Tan had some reservations around how much regard the Shire might have had to what was being proposed as industrial before they put residential there. So in effect, as you can plainly see, there is no buffer zone. Originally, there was a proposal to perhaps have a residential interface along that strip, but for various reasons over the years that's been deemed to be impractical as a solution, and so light industrial is intended as the zoning because it should, as I explained, have a seamless interface as far as emissions go on the residential land to the southern side.
So if we're following the Metropolitan Regional Scheme, are we permitted to propose a different zoning to create a buffer zone immediately adjacent to this? What on one side of the street is a very nice residential street with brand new houses. Can we do that?
Through Mr Mayor, certainly the prospect of having a, as Mr Lohman has intimated, if the land on the eastern side of the road, the eastern side of Adelaide Street, that will be subject of a structure plan for the most part. It is possible through the structure plan to have a treatment to the front. What was considered is, instead of having a residential treatment to the front, to instead perhaps have a 20-metre wide landscaping strip with the light industrial behind that. So it's certainly the notion of some sort of appropriate amenity interface has been considered, and the structure plan can work out precisely how that can be. And if it's a structure plan, it will come before council. Obviously, council won't make the decision, it'll go to the commission, but council can have first stab at deciding maybe what it recommends as the appropriate interface, whether that's a 20-metre landscape or something else. So that will be the possibility to address that in subsequent instruments, Mr Mayor.
Okay, and I guess the question, is that the best place to do that interface protection, or should it be done at this stage?
Through Mr Mayor, just very quickly, because this amendment is a special use, the reason it's a special use is so we can introduce all the textual requirements as to what needs to happen. If the council sees fit to say through, if it's advertised or even before that, to have some specific provision in about an interface, it's free to do so.
Yep. Can we stick that in the alternate motion as well, then, Mr Russell?
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to produce any additional textual provisions for this amendment in addition to splitting it if the council sees fit, yes.
Mr Vanlin, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I may just add to what Phil just said. If you look at page 254, in the recommendation as part of the structure plan provisions, condition B, as listed on page 254, actually requires the structure plan to address such interface and the screening of that along that street. So it is in there already.
Thank you, Mr Vanlin. Councillor Kalani, you got a question?
It was just very quickly about the... Oh, there we go. About, the sandpit. Is that then being used as a sandpit now, or is it being used at all, or is it actually... What's happened? Because what's happening at that sandpit thing?
Yes, through Mr Mayor, the sandpit, the Ganjumi property, we've got them under deed, them having obtained an approval for a purpose-built recycling facility in Talbot Road. We had them under deed to remove all of the, or cease the operations of recycling, remove all their infrastructure and the rest of it from the Adelaide Street property. We gave them some reasonable extensions given COVID. We gave them extensions to about the end of last month. So I've got to check in with Mr Ganjumi to ensure that he's done what is required and he's completely shut up shop there. And the deed and the terms don't require the complete finishing off of the sand pit, but it and he may well, in theory he can continue to excavate sand, but that was never the purpose. It was a recycling facility. So once he's moved all his stuff, which I think is just about finished, then that site will just be an empty site with no activity or traffic coming out of it on Adelaide Street.
Move on. Well, last question on this one, Councillor. I think we've done this one to death. Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 254, point B, as Mr Vanderlyn pointed out, there is a subject treatment that should be considered in the structure plan stage, but I'm interested to know what would be a suitable... Is it possible that we can designate at this stage, in an alternative motion, a certain width interface treatment? Because I'm concerned that we might just end up with a normal verge and that being told that that's just a suitable interface. Would it be worth, or could we designate a certain width, say 15, 20 metres or the like?
Through Mr Mayor, absolutely at Council's discretion to request any additional text or specification in it, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions that we wish to raise? Councillor Bedovnik, you had a question of staff as well.
Through you, Mr Mayor. It's just in relation to item 4.10. A couple of the people that addressed council appear to have concerns with the level of engagement with neighbours. Are you able to advise how many letters were sent out?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we only directly notified Mr Stanley. The reason for that being, I think as Mr Pavlinovich intimated, he's been operating there for a long time. On our records, at least until recently, the only complaints we had received about the operation occurring on Mr Pavlinovich's property was from Mr Stanley. So when we issued a direction to Mr Pavlinovich to cease what he was doing because it was unlawful, and we engaged in the sat around that and said you need to lodge an application, we only referred it to Mr Stanley as the party that had submitted the original complaints. Now, Mr Pavlinovich has indicated that various other neighbours don't have a problem with him, but you've obviously heard this evening that other neighbours do. I'm confident that between those neighbours that Mr Pavlinovich has said has not got a problem with his proposal and those that do, which are the parties that have made submissions this evening, we've got a pretty good canvassing of the adjoining neighbours as to where they sit with regard to Mr Pavlinovich's application. But it's true to say we only originally referred it to Mr Stanley.
Just to follow up through you, Mr Mayor, is it reasonable, I haven't been out to the site, but is it reasonable to contact or advertise a bit more widely? How many people would be impacted by it, and would that be something reasonable to do?
It's through Mr Mayor, it's the great question of planning, and you have to be careful how you approach this, because if you cast your net very wide, then logically the level of impact of any particular proposal on a piece of land must naturally diminish as you go further out. So really with these types of proposals, which are really at the end of the day is a home business, we would always assume that the most affected people are going to be the direct neighbours. To advertise it to someone that might be down the end of the street, in the same locality, etc., whilst you could do that, the question is the value of the exercise and what is going to be the likely relevance of submissions you might get from parties that are quite remote from something like this. So when we, as councillors would have heard, Mr Mayor, when we talk about radiuses for consultation, next door, 100 metres, 200 metres, 500 metres in rural or 1 kilometre. There's no precise science to it, but it's generally a reflection of what an ordinary reasonable person might expect to be the extent of impact of a facility on the surrounding area. And in this instance with the home business, obviously the most prevalent impact is going to be the neighbours that share a boundary. So you could do that, but the question will really be what benefit will it bring to council to consider the planning merits of the proposal in terms of its impact.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr Russell, item 4.1. In regard to the Act, I think everyone's pretty happy with how that's going to go, but the devil's always in the detail with the scheme. One area that I don't see a lot of detail on is pre-existing use rights. Now, let's say someone's got a pre-existing use right, it could be anything, and they wanted to, and I assume that covers the whole lot of the land that they have. If they want to make an improvement or a change or even an expansion, how would we define that such that there's some certainty for people in understanding their pre-existing use rights and further uses?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the attachments in the report on the Swan Valley planning scheme, the hard copy is not in the file, but there is a link to the website for the scheme. From my recollection, I mean, the report says it follows basically standard model scheme text format. All schemes have acknowledgement of non-conforming use rights. It's an orthodox provision. It is in this scheme. So if someone can say, here's a City of Swan Local Planning Scheme 17 approval obtained on 11th of November 2020, and the scheme comes in 1st of January next year and prohibits the use that they've got an approval for, they say, here's the non-conforming use, I've got prior approval, and they can continue under that scheme to enjoy that non-conforming use right, subject to the normal qualifications, which often say if it's discontinued, etc. Yep.
The key question, though, is if they want to, over time, make a change or a improvement or whatever to that pre-existing use right, what limits them? Is that a 50%, a 20%, or is it just at a discretion? How does it happen? In other words, it wouldn't necessarily be hard limited, bang, on the day the Act comes into place as to the current existing use right.
Just very quickly, Mr Mayor, it depends on the particular provisions in the model scheme text or in this proposed scheme. Our scheme, for example, basically just says you can apply for an extension, and then the council generally on a non-conforming use has got to advertise it, and then you just apply the normal considerations. Our previous scheme, Scheme 9, did have such qualifications to say you can only expand or add to it by about 75%. There are no such provisions in the model scheme text or I believe in this Swan Valley scheme. There's also a provision about saying, well, you can change from one non-conforming use to another. Recently, I've had cause to wonder that provision might be interpreted by different planning staff in a different way, but assuredly, whatever the scheme is, it doesn't matter what a planning officer, no matter at what level, interprets it, there will be a court somewhere in the land that will tell him or her whether they've got it right or not. So,
thank you, Mr Russell. My point is that I'm trying to get to is I can't see a real clear direction for people in terms of pre-existing use rights and the future. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Scully.
In relation to item 4.8, the proposed outbuilding shed in Averley, Mr Russell, I'm just wondering about the submitted plans on page 383. There's no provision for a crossover on the subject site. I was wondering if the applicant's got any plans at all for getting in and out of the shed.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as far as the application that's been submitted for a storage shed, there's nothing that I'm aware of where the applicant has said we're going to use it as a garage. Now, in this instance, some of the objecting neighbours might have a better idea, or at least a suspicion, perhaps, as to what the applicant is after. Certainly, prior to next week, we can clarify whether or not they're intending to use it as a garage. But you're quite right. Mr Mayor, if they are going to use it as a garage, then you can expect that they may then make an application for a second crossover. But I can't confirm whether that's the purpose, but all we can do, if the council wishes, is to ask that question of the applicant. It is unfortunate, in my view, that Mr Taylor, who is the applicant, I believe, if I've got the name right, hasn't presented this evening, because certainly you could obviously answer Councillor Coley's question, but I can source that prior to next week.
Councillor Kellner.
Regarding item 4.10, the demountables on the proponent's property, they were approved in 2016, were they?
I'll need to confirm that, Mr Mayor. Take that on notice and confirm that.
Okay, that'd be great if you could let us know. You have a list of personal items he's got on there, on the property, is that correct? Or?
Again, I'll have to confirm whether that was supplied as part of the documentation.
Oh, great. Okay, because it seems that the objections seem to really, they're concerned about the amount of basically stuff on that property and, the noise and unsightly. So, being, useful to know exactly what's going to stay there and what's not going to stay there.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, because the matter of the unlawful use of the land is still in the SAT, with a direction which we've agreed to stay while we process this application. And as has been pointed out, the most that Mr Pavlinovich can get approval for is the 50 square metres. And as he's already confirmed, everything else outside of that, if there's the material that he's got for his business that is greater or can't fit within the 50 square metres within the shed, he will need to remove. And I think in response to Councillor Johnson's question, I think it indicated 4 months. And certainly it's always expected that if the approval is issued for this, he will need to comply, and everything else that can't fit within the shed and the conditions that are recommended, he'll need to remove that stuff off-site, wherever that might be.
And just one last question. So, sorry, it may have been before my time, but he's got an application at the SAT, has he?
Well, what happened, through you, Mr Mayor, what happened with this is that in response to the complaints about Mr Pavlinovich operating a business,
yes,
and it's gone back and forth with various bits and pieces that have been involved, including, I believe, the Ombudsman at one point.
Back in 2016.
That we've issued him a direction. And then what happens with all of that is he's appealed the direction, and and that's in the SAT. And in the SAT there we said, look, you can't have a shop there because it's unlawful. The most you can have is a home business. But to have a home business, you're limited to certain criteria set out in the report, which is the scheme provisions, including maximum of 50 square metres. So and those directions are afoot. So really, we wouldn't be prepared to withdraw those directions, we would be prepared to withdraw those directions subject to a clear undertaking from Mr Pavlinovich, which I believe he's made here already this evening, that the rest of that stuff will be gone within 4 months.
Right.
Or if council wants to, and council can give direction on that on this application, if it says as a separate motion, Mr Pavlinovich has got to remove all the rest of the stuff extraneous to the 50 square metres within 4 months, 5 months, 2 months, whatever council sees fit, if that's the case.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, my question was along those lines, Mr Mayor. Can we request a list of stuff that is to remain, that is not part of his business, and give Mr Pavlinovich a deadline to remove everything else of 4 months? Is that a reasonable condition, assuming other councils are not going to oppose it completely?
Through Mr Mayor, not as a condition on this approval, but as a separate motion, part 2 motion to 1, if the council is mindful to approve it, 1, with these conditions, and 2, the other stuff not encompassed under this approval to be removed in whatever time frame, yes.
Okay, and a list of what is permitted to remain.
Yes.
So that could be produced. Okay. I guess the question arises for me is are the Swan Valley councils going to... I'll have to wait and find out what they're going to do.
Mr Mayor, my concern is who's going to make that decision? Who's making the decision? What's staying and what's going? Because that's your problem. He can say basically it's all going or it's all staying. Who's going to make the decision? What do you want to keep? You know exactly what the issue is. Ward councillors?
Councillors there.
Mr Mayor, I'll be withdrawing that item and moving an alternate recommendation.
Okay. Okay. Any further of Mr Russell? Thank you, Mr Russell. I'll move now to Executive Manager Planning and Development, Mr Vanderlyn. And we already have an alternative recommendation, I believe, or motion from Councillor Catalano on 13.5 has already been submitted.
That's right. Mr Mayor, if there are no questions, I've got nothing specific to highlight on those three items listed there.
Okay. Councillor Henderson, you had your hand up.
I did, thank you, Mayor. And I've had discussions with Mr Coaten about the trees issue, and he's preparing an alternate motion for me as well. Just want to cover a couple of points. In regard to 13.5, though, that's to do with the other matter, the trees. But 13.5, in terms of the plan for the cycle network, I pulled up the City of Swan's got a map on bike paths and networks, and I found it rather confusing that it's proposed that the network for the Upper Swan Clementine development has people riding out of the place heading east and then down Great Northern and then heading back sort of southwest. And I asked Mr Coaten what it would cost for a footbridge / bike bridge over the Ellenbrook at Rose Street, which would then hook into the current networks. So I'm proposing perhaps that we withdraw that part of the plan within 13.5 because we're later dealing with a bike path issue up on West Swan Road. So how do you deal with that?
Mr Mayor, if I may, just with regards to the actual cycle network plan, if you look at page 117 of the agenda, which is the second last page before you get to part B, that section of the final network plan actually covers that area that Councillor Henderson is talking about. And what you can see then, Councillor, is that there's a cycle network from the Clementine development. There's a link south into the Swan Valley, but the link across the brook at Rose Street is actually shown there as a local route. So that just clarifies that the network, the long-term network, actually includes both links to the south and to the west.
Yes, thank you. So what I'm suggesting is that part 5.4 of the Cardno report that outlines that section of the plan would be removed and replaced effectively by utilising that Rose Street connection into Ellenbrook. Would that complicate any aspects of where you're heading with the planning process?
Sorry, Councillor, I just need to get to section, was it 5.4? So that's... Yeah, so if you look at the broader network plan, there is a link across Rose Street to the west proposed as well. What is shown as part 5.4 there is purely one of the priorities, which is the southern link. So if you take the southern link out, it doesn't need to be replaced by the Rose Street one unless you want to make that one of the priority projects to be further designed.
Okay, so I'll be proposing that the Rose Street is a priority. So can we work on an alternate to make that position for the meeting, please?
I can prepare such an alternative motion.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a quick question to Mr. Vanderlyn. Have you updated this final draft under page 117 to include the Metronet line for Morley to Ellenbrook, please?
This plan shows, in terms of the Morley-Ellenbrook line, it shows a cycle path along, an east-west cycle path along Marshall Road and along Reed Highway, and then north-south along Drumpelia. So it doesn't show the exact alignment of the train line, because at the time, yeah, so the train line itself will include a PSP, provision for a PSP in the long term, but that's not specifically shown in this plan.
Would there be any issue adding that? We know where the proposed line is, give or take, in regards to the Ellenbrook line. Is there any possibility we can put that as a primary route as well? Because I could imagine that the state government's going to do something with it, but if it's not on the map, it may not help us with the lobbying of funding for it.
What we will be able to do in that regard is to have a separate resolution to request the Department of Transport to add it to their plan, because this overall plan is in line with the Department of Transport's overall cycle network plan, and that component of their plan doesn't incorporate it. So we can say we propose that it be added to their network plan, and in that way work it in the longer term as part of ours. So essentially we can propose that, yeah.
And last question as well. Can you please provide some clarification as well down Hepburn Ave? Because it says it's a secondary route, but in the last year it's actually doubled the amount of people travelling from Northlink down Hepburn Ave. Why is that not considered a primary route as such? Or can we propose that as well, please?
We have clarified with the Department of Transport why they've identified it as a secondary route. The reason for that is that that route basically has got a catchment just on the western side of Hepburn for that part, so it doesn't have residential development on the eastern or northeastern side of the road. Compared to Hepburn Avenue further west towards the ocean, where Hepburn's got development on both sides of the road. So certainly it is one of those aspects that we can also include in an alternative to say that the upgrade of that section of Hepburn's cycle path as a primary route should be investigated by them as to be added in the next review of the plan. So we can add it.
Councillor Johnson.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Another question for Mr. Vanderlyn. On page 59, it shows the cycle path in the neighbourhood of Guildford and South Guildford, and I see there's looks like a secondary. I think it is a secondary route and a local route going from Guildford down, would you believe it, Johnson Street, to what looks like Queen's Road. Is that consistent with the proposed underpass that we have on the advocacy priority list for South Guildford?
Mr. Vanderlyn.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just struggling to get that page because I think that's the page number. Perhaps that is the page number on. So in the agenda, what page?
Agenda page number 59. Oh, 95 rather. Sorry, I'm reading it upside down.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I thought. Yeah.
Sorry about that. That's a trick question.
Okay, so I'm on page 95 now. So you're talking about the link from now that I've got
down Johnson Street from Guildford to South Guildford. it crosses the Helena River, and at the point where it crosses the Helena River, on our advocacy priority list, we have advocacy item 2, put an underpass under the Helena River to enable people to cross, and I think the intention was that we would put a cycle path under there. Certainly that's the community's intention. Is this map consistent with that advocacy priority list item?
Yes, it is. It is consistent. That link is shown in the in our trails map. So it's more the trails map than rather than the cycle path plan. So, but they are integrated.
So is that?
So it's possible to do that.
All right. So do I need to look at a different page to see that trails map, or is that
No,
a different document?
That's a different plan to this.
Okay. Thank you.
But it is accommodated and integrated with this work.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Henderson.
Okay, so this one's probably to Mr. Coaten. The secondary route on page 117 that goes from the Millhouse Road roundabout through to Great Northern Highway. Have you some idea where that road would go, where that bike path would go, given that the future proposal is for 4 lanes of traffic along that area?
Mr. Coaten.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm having trouble bringing up that page 117. So you're talking about the section that it's in the in item 5.1. Is that the section you're referring to? Yeah. So that road is scheduled to be dualled. So in the future, the exact alignment of that is unknown. I think if that answers your question. But, yeah.
Any further questions, Mr. Vanderlyn?
Sorry, you know you've got the different, like there's the primary, secondary and local route. So are those bike paths going to be exactly the same on all of those routes, or are they going to have different kind of bike paths?
In functionality, in terms of the detail of how they are constructed, they will be different. And there's a section in the report that actually explains the difference in that. Page 114, there's a sketch there that identifies the different functionality of a primary, secondary and local route. So it's about the volume of cycle traffic that will be expected on the route. The primary routes are high demand corridors that connect to major destinations. They provide high quality, safe, convenient and where possible uninterrupted routes that form the spine of the cycle networks. And the secondary routes is very similar, but they have a lower demand than the primary routes, but provide for similar levels of quality, safety and convenience. So it's all described there.
I just meant actually in the design of it. So are they like going to be, the primary route's going to be a bigger bike path to the local route bike path?
Yes, the primary routes are basically like a PSP, and then the secondary route, it's got the same functionality, but it may not have lighting along the whole route, and it may be narrow in certain sections because there's a lower demand for it.
Okay, so really then this cycle network is actually like another road network, or it's almost like an extension of the road because, it's like traffic, isn't it? It's basically volumes of traffic going on what's effectively a cycle path. So you've got primary route 1 is going to be heavy lot of traffic, so it's going to be a bigger bike path. That's like it could be that we end up with really a lot more hard surfaces throughout the city next to roads, which you've got to weigh up the benefit of people cycling against the sort of heat sink lack of trees and, because it's effectively road infrastructure or a kind of vehicle infrastructure which, doesn't and there's no shade, and it becomes that kind of hard, kind of industrial infrastructure. So
you are right. It's infrastructure designed to cater for cyclists, and then in the ultimate scenario, those people that are using the cycle routes don't use cars. So you probably need less roads if you have more cycle routes.
Okay, no further questions, Mr. Van Lien. We'll move on to the Executive Manager of Community Wellbeing, and you've only got the one item there, Mr. Bishop.
Did have one question actually for Mr. Van der Lien.
Right, last question.
Last question. It's about 8.1. Mr. Van der Lien, is the building permit that is shown there, is that the totality of the document?
Mr. Mayor, that is the total permit. That's not a copy of the building plan.
Okay, so we've got what we asked for then. Thank you.
Mr. Bishop, any questions of Mr. Bishop? There is. Councillor Johnson. Yes or no?
We're asking Mr. Bishop. I thought we were on to Mr. Conan. No?
So you obviously haven't got a question for Mr. Bishop.
I'm going in alphabetical order. Are we going to Executive Manager Community?
Well, we're talking to Mr. Bishop. You got one or not? We can go backwards.
Well, the question I've got, Mr. Mayor, is it says here on my piece of paper, it says Executive Manager Operations, so I was expecting...
Yeah, Councillor, we can go back to it, right? So don't stress over it and don't make a big deal about it.
Thought we'd skipped over it, Mr. Mayor. No, I don't have a question for Mr. Bishop.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you, Councillor. Okay. Any questions? Mr. Coaten, have you got anything on your list that you wish to present to us specifically?
No, there weren't any deputations on my items. In relation to item 5.1, Councillor Henderson and Councillor Catalano have both contacted me regarding alternative motions, which I sent through the drafts to them. So I'm happy to take questions from Councillor Johnson, I expect.
Yeah.
Now you can ask your question, Councillor Johnson. You're stressing about.
Yeah, I wasn't stressing about it, Mr. Mayor. I was just a bit puzzled as the order is pretty clear. We must have a different sheet.
Well, ask your question and get on with it, man.
All right, I am getting on with it, Mr. Mayor. All right, so in the interest of getting on with it, is it possible to have a cycle path that weaves its way through the trees? And is that what the other councillors' sort of alternate motions are all about?
It is possible to have one, but the path would need to be narrowed, and then we wouldn't meet the requirements for that path, so we would miss out on the state government funding for it. So it would be physically possible, but wouldn't meet the standards, and because of that, we wouldn't get the state government funding.
So I'm interested to know what the council's alternate motions are. Are they to produce a path that weaves through it, or to just not do it?
Well, I'm happy to answer that. Let's see if the councillors are happy for me to do that. But Councillor Henderson, who'll be first as the ward councillor, his motion is generally basically not to build it on the basis, leading on from the question that he asked me earlier, in that that road is ultimately planned to be dual through there, and the alignment of that isn't confirmed as yet. So not building it would obviously save the trees as well. And Councillor Catalano's motion looked into purchasing some of the private property adjoining there to bypass the trees.
Can I just add to that? Obviously, if the road's going to be built, it's going to have land purchased anyhow.
And knock over the trees as well.
Yeah. And yeah, Councillor Catalano.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to remind you, Jim, that if we could actually have, or if I could have, a dollar value for those kind of trees, because I think that, if in future it's a question of the tree or question of purchasing a bit of land, it'd be really handy to be able to weigh up those two values.
Yeah, I sent you an email today on that. We have asked for a price, and we have been,
Thanks.
but we haven't received it yet. We're expecting it tomorrow.
Great, that'll be fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, so Mr. Curtin, I'm just wondering, is it possible at low cost to improve the existing path and weave through the trees, but without spending quite as much money as we were planning to? Is that a reasonable thing to try to do?
Well, we're getting $200,000 from the state government, so of the $400,000 project. So if we don't have it at the 2.5 metres, we won't get the $200,000 from the state government. So it would be possible to have a narrow path the whole way through, but it wouldn't comply with appropriate standards.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Perry.
I've just got two very quick questions to Mr. Coden, if that's okay. Mr. Coden, prior to the this is in relation to the Bullsbrook Museum shed funding. Prior to the April meeting, noted in page 425, in your professional opinion, what were the chances of receiving that additional funding?
I wasn't at the meeting. You're talking about the meeting from the grant funding from Lottery West?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but my understanding is that it's virtually nothing. We've got no chance of getting it.
But prior to when they introduced that COVID-19 change,
prior to
what was the
that,
gut feel in regards to that? That's what I'm asking. Would it be high probability, low probability?
I think it was a reasonably high probability from the feedback that I've heard, but I've only heard that feedback secondhand. I never actually met with Lottery West myself.
And so the second question is, how much of this impact, how much impact of this change to Lotteries West has impacted the City of Swan?
Well, they've diverted all their funding to the COVID thing, so it does mean there's not the opportunity for us to put in for submissions that we normally would have done, that we normally would have applied for.
Just got another follow-up, if that's okay. What was the previous funding that was provided from Lotteries West to the City of Swan for the previous year, like 2019 financial year?
Yeah, I would have to take that on notice unless Mr Bishop or Mrs Lay know offhand. No, we'd have to take that on notice.
Fine. Thank you very much, Mr Cudden.
Councillor Henderson. Any further questions of Mr Coden? Councillor Catalano.
Actually, I just wanted to ask a few questions about the adjustments, but maybe that's Miss Lay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Astute, well done.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions of Mr Coden? Thank you, Mr Coden. Okay, Manager of Stakeholder Relations, Ms Lay, anything you wish to address with us?
No, Mr Mayor, happy to take questions.
Okay, Councillor Catalano.
Thanks very much. So on page 503, I noticed there were some adjustments from the Sturtridge Road footbridge, now cancelled, Fountain Park Boardwalk, now cancelled, and works on Coolaman Oval. They're cancelled. So I wonder, when did they get cancelled, all of these? And can we have a bit more? Yeah, I thought it was...
apologies, the description isn't perhaps as clear as it could be, but the works weren't actually cancelled. They were actually undertaken as part of maintenance budget, so the capital projects were cancelled, but the work was actually done. That's in relation to the two bridges. I believe, I'd have to double check on the oval, but I think that was one where the needs of the group had changed. And so the funding was moved to another project.
Oh, great. Well, you could just email me about that then. Thank you. Cheers.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question, Ms Leahy, if that's okay. The 3.712 million in the 60 days column, is that mainly a commercial residential properties, and is that mainly because of COVID-19 issues, please?
Through Mr Mayor, if I can just clarify, which report?
The debtors report. My apologies. 490, page 490, my apologies.
And Councillor Perry, are you looking at the 60 days?
Yes, 60 days, that's correct. Can you give us
I
a bit of
believe
understanding
that
in regards to
was a move of an invoice to a state government department that had moved from 30 into 60.
We've had that previously. Yeah, okay. Cool, thank you.
Any further questions, Ms Lay? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I've got a question about the Swan Valley Harvest Festival. I was just wondering what... It does say that the Swan Valley Tourist Association has proposed this, but what triggered them to suddenly need to have a harvest festival?
Through you, Mr Mayor, this has been something that the Tourism Alliance has spoken about for quite a number of years, and earlier this year they approached the city to hold a smaller event that was then cancelled due to COVID, but this harvest festival with a music theme has been on their agenda for a number of years.
Follow-up question is, we're putting in $46,000 worth of marketing advertising. What are they contributing? What are the businesses and the Swan Valley Tourist Authority, or whatever they're called, Alliance, what are they contributing?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the proposal is a $50,000 budget allocation, of which the city would contribute half, and it would be on the basis that they could attract matching funding.
In terms of what's actually going to happen out there? I see the event proposal now.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the city would do an expression of interest process similar to what we run for Entwined, to find local businesses who are prepared to run and pay for their own events. We would package that up into marketing material, into ticket sales, and support the Swan Valley.
I'll tell you, the reason it's puzzling me is that these kinds of festivals occur in the UK at harvest time, and they consist of people dancing around poles and making corn dollies and things like that. Presumably it's going to be completely different to that. So in which case, why is it called a harvest festival?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it is to celebrate the time of year when there is most produce available in the Swan Valley.
Any further questions, Ms Lay? Mr Caton, you could comment.
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor, just to Councillor Catalano in relation to the question I couldn't answer before in relation to Coolum Oval. That was in relation to a rugby club that used that oval that had wanted some designs done for lighting upgrades, but they've rearranged the ovals that they're using, and so it's been transferred to Charlotte's where they need the lighting.
Any further questions, Ms Lay? Thank you. That takes us to the CEO or Manager of Governments and Strategy. Any questions of Mr Albright or the CEO? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Relating to C1.1, which is reporting on payments of councillor expenses. So it seems that the state government has obviously read my resolution and decided to go ahead with it anyway. Does this mean that in this financial year we will actually be reporting line by line each councillor's mileage and the amount and babysitting and what have you? Is that the plan?
Ms Albright?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that is the intention. Ms Lay may want to add to that.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, the city is trying to be proactive and actually introduce that before it becomes a requirement.
Well, it's good to know they're following my lead, Mr Mayor. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Yep, okay. Now go to any questions on any of the confidential items, councillors.